Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Larson, executive editor of Power Magazine, and you're listening to the Power Podcast. On today's episode, I'm doing something a little bit out of the ordinary for our podcast, in that I'm doing a special edition in collaboration with the McCrary Institute's Cyber Focus podcast. And in this episode, I'm joined by Frank Cilluffo, who is the director of the McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security, and also a professor of practice at Auburn University. So Frank and I touch on several different topics related to the power industry and cybersecurity. And I think the conversation is hopefully interesting for you all. And I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to a special edition of Cyber Focus and the Power Podcast. I'm Frank Cilluffo, and...
Hi, I'm Aaron Larson, executive editor of Power Magazine, and I'm the host of the Power Podcast. So I'm excited to be here with you, Frank, and talk about everything power-related and cybersecurity related.
Awesome. And Aaron, maybe we're both used to asking all the questions. We'll go back and forth and do a little bit of a tick and talk and the like. But I thought we can start with maybe a discussion around the grid. And few issues are more significant from a cybersecurity standpoint than the electricity sector. But I think that there's been so much change in terms of the grid to try to make it more efficient, more reliant, more resilient. But I'd be curious what your thinking is if we were to paint a picture of the state of the grid today.
Well, it's changed a lot. Just maybe a decade ago, we were seeing most of the power that's being put on the grid coming from centralized power stations, that being coal plants, nuclear plants, hydropower plants, gas-fired plants, all these large facilities that had big rotating generators that supplied the grid. And it was fairly one-way directional power flow, everything coming out from those central power stations going to through large transmission lines to distribution networks and to households and businesses. Today, that has changed enormously. I mean, we are seeing a lot more distributed energy resources that have come online, a lot smaller facilities that are incorporating, solar power, little solar farms here and there, community solar projects, wind turbines. A lot of energy storage has been added to the grid. So it's just a completely different setup than it used to be. And we're seeing a lot of rooftop solar, and just a big change in what is powering households today and what's powering businesses today. So that, to me, is really phenomenal, and it's something that we've been covering, with Power Magazine in our news and in a lot of the articles that we write. And that opens up a lot of cybersecurity vulnerability, I believe. So that's your expertise. What do you see happening in that realm?
Aaron, let me just to underscore for our viewers, listeners, and the like, Power Magazine is a must read. So it's how I get smart and stay up to date on all the new developments. But I think you raise a great point. At the end of the day, it has changed in terms of it. It's much more complex than it is. It also expands the attack surface in many ways exponentially. The flip side is it also can build in a little more redundancy and resilience, because it's not just one target we're necessarily putting a bullseye on. But I think from a national security standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, if you don't have power, all these other systems are somewhat irrelevant. So the significance of keeping our lights on, keeping our energy systems, making sure that they're resilient is truly at the very top of the list. We talk about our critical infrastructure sectors. There's no infrastructure more critical than power. So if you don't have power, it doesn't matter where transportation is or finance and banking, because they ain't going to be up and running. So I think that it is at the very, very top of that list. And increasingly, we're starting to see the demands around artificial intelligence and the massive power needs. If we want to be AI dominant, we can't do that if we're not energy dominant. The two are inextricably interwoven, hand in glove. And if you start looking at where the country wants to be technologically, if we want to lead, we really need to continue to double down, triple down, and look at all sorts of sources of energy as well, right? I mean, a lot of talk around, and I'd be curious what your thinking is around small modular nuclear. You're starting to see data centers actually buy their own facilities. What's the latest and greatest there?
Yeah, that's a huge change that you mentioned. I remember, even a year ago, we really weren't talking about data centers that much. We'd have a particular article maybe every couple of months about a data center project or something like that, and the energy that they'd be using. But today, we're hearing about data centers almost daily, and the amount of power that they're going to demand, and how are the utilities going to keep up with it? And like you said, the tech companies are actually going out sourcing their own power. They're making deals with nuclear power developers to build new plants, small modular reactors, like you said. And they're also working with bringing back old units. The 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is going to be brought back into service because Microsoft needs the power. So that's a big development in seeing, another one that's coming back is the Palisades nuclear plant that was retired. And there's talk about Duane Arnold in Iowa coming and being brought back online. So these are really important developments, and it's great for the nuclear industry. Actually, my background is in nuclear power.
Absolutely a petty officer too, Navy, right?
I was a chief in the Navy I spent 13 years there.
Petty officer, yeah.
And went to the Quad City station and worked there for several years. And so nuclear is near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to see some of these advanced reactors that are being developed. And I've had on my own podcast, the Power Podcast, several CEOs from different companies, to talk about their designs. I had Clay Sell from X Energy talking about his projects that he's got underway. And Doug Robeson is from Natura Resources. They're building a unit, a micro reactor at the Abilene Christian University in Texas. And just actually recorded an episode with COO of TerraPower. That's Eric Williams. And I'm going to be publishing that very soon, perhaps even today. And so, I'm talking with these high-level executives, and they're really excited and optimistic about the prospects for their designs and where they're going. So I think there's a lot of optimism, and the Idaho National Laboratory is another place where I've been and visited the site, and they're working on a Marvel microreactor there, which is a really exciting development as well. So I think, there's a lot happening, but again, it comes back to the safety and the vulnerabilities that these sort of projects could introduce into the system.
And Aaron, and shoot down my narrative here, but traditionally, it was a pretty risk adverse industry, and we seem to be lagging a little bit in recent past on the nuclear side in particular. Right now, it's innovating though, right? It's no longer there's this mindset that they're risk adverse, they're very conservative in what they're doing. We can't afford that today, though, can we? We've got to go all in, don't we?
Well, I think when you talk about risk, there are obviously things that you need to be cognizant of safety.
Security and safety standpoint. Yep.
Yeah, the nuclear industry will never compromise on safety. And that is something that is near and dear to all of their hearts, because they know any accident at one facility is an accident at all facilities, because that affects everyone around the world. And so they will always err on the side of safety, and they move slowly, but they are moving much more quickly today than they used to. And many of these new advanced reactors are inherently safe. They're a smaller design that has less, fuel to be concerned with. They have smaller boundary areas that they need to comply with. So that in itself kind of gives some credibility, and it helps the safety aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So that's certainly a benefit, and something that the industry is very aware of, and working to maintain.
So for our viewers, clearly we are seeing innovation, but security is not an afterthought. So we're starting to bake into the design of some of our thinking, both from a public safety and from a national security and economic security perspective, some of our redundancy, resiliency, and the like. What I also find really interesting is states themselves play significant roles in all of this, and some are becoming magnets for new forms of energy and obviously building out the infrastructure for all of this. Any states come to mind that are doing it right here, and others that maybe can do it a little differently if they tried?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, I talked to the TerraPower COO, and they're building a project in Kemmerer, Wyoming. And he was very appreciative of the support that he gets from the state of Wyoming. They are really excited about the project. They are very energy uh, intensive. They've been a coal producing state. So they're looking for ways to evolve and to take those workers who used to have jobs in the coal industry and shift them into, nuclear power and wind and solar and other energy types of projects and jobs. So that's one state that I know is doing a great job. And Texas is another that I'd have to hold up as an example. Governor Greg Abbott is very nuclear, pro-nuclear, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a Texas Nuclear Alliance, and they're developing, special projects and working to build a nuclear pipeline in the state. I know last year they did an event, and former Governor Rick Perry was there as a pro-nuclear person, and Ernie Moniz, the former defense energy secretary, spoke at the event. He's also very pro-nuclear. So these are states that are really taking the bull by the horns and trying to develop and basically get the jobs that are going to come into this industry. They want them in their state. They want to be the leader promoting this technology. New York is another example of a really, I think, progressive energy mindset. They actually just announced today that they're planning to build another nuclear plant in New York. They didn't announce a site, but they are certainly pro-nuclear in that respect as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exciting to see some of these, and it's not only nuclear in New York. They had what is our plant of the year, the South Fork wind farm out, offshore wind farm. And that was a progressive and interesting project, and something that I think needs to be developed more. Offshore wind is right now still very expensive
Mm-hmm.
in the grand scheme of things. But as more projects get done, and as the pipeline gets built, and you get more experience, first of a kind projects are always expensive. But when you get to that nth of a kind, that's where you can really tap into the economics of or scale and things like that. So that's good to see, and something that's important to develop in our nation.
And not to put a fine point on it, but you mentioned so many different forms of energy, and I'm reminded of the old test, the A, B, C, or D, all of the above. This sounds like it is clearly in all of the above, but is there one form that you think outpowers the rest? No pun intended.
I'll tell you what, I'm really excited about what the future holds because I haven't
Yeah.
even mentioned some of the things that are under development that I feel are really important, like deep dry rock geothermal. This is where they're developing technology that they can drill deeper into the earth and actually get geothermal energy anywhere in the country or around the world. They're getting deep enough where we can install lines and bring the heat up to the surface and utilize it anywhere. And that's really, I think, a game changer. Another thing is fusion. Fusion power is, I don't think it's just a dream anymore. This is something that I believe is going to happen in the relatively near future. I
Wow.
think we're going to see some small scale projects coming online, in the next decade. And as they get more uh, feedback and lessons learned and some of these tokamak projects, we think about ITER over in France, a lot of countries involved in that, and a lot of excitement around what can be done with fusion energy.
Are there other countries that we should be learning from? And I know we're all learning. This is a global set of issues, and you can't isolate it from what is playing out globally. But are there some countries you think we ought to take some notes from and try to emulate?
You know, China is so
Yeah.
much involved in
I was afraid you were going there. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, they really are. They really are developing more wind and more nuclear and more solar than anywhere else in the world. They are just putting so much money into energy that we honestly can't let them take the lead on all of these things that we have been so involved in over the years. Nuclear power used to be our bread and butter, back in the early days, and we've let them kind of take over. But I think we're coming back. We've got a lot of innovative companies here working on advanced reactors, and that I'm excited about. Other technology, as I mentioned, fusion is quite a lot of companies working on that. Some of them small, just startups, but they're doing good things and really pushing the boundaries on what can be done in those fields. So, you know,
A- And there's a
a lot-
big gap between what can be done in a lab and what can be fielded. And I really get your point. First builds are always going to be more costly. Once it hits that scale point, though, then it's pennies on the dollar, and it makes a whole lot of sense. But on the fusion side, since you brought it up a couple times, how close do you think we are? And what could that look like? Because that makes my head hurt in terms of understanding a little bit.
well, I'm not a fusion expert.
Yeah.
I understand fission much better because I went to
Uh-huh.
school for that
We've
sort of
been
thing.
there.
But um, what I understand is there's different methods of doing it. There's different ways that they're focusing. The big tokamak is uh, things is what ITER is based on over in France, and General Atomics in San Diego has a unit that they're developing there as well that is really important technology that's being utilized, and I'm excited about those deals. But Commonwealth Fusion is another Massachusetts-based developer that's using. I think it's called Spark. It's another kind of smaller tokamak design. But then there's others that are just aiming, atoms at each other in a chamber that seems to be really interesting technology too. So I think one of those could actually be uh, operational sooner rather than later. And that could be as soon as, the 2030s, early
Wow.
2030s, I think that we could see energy being developed and utilized through fusion.
And that sounds like a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really an important and exciting thing that could open up a whole new realm of possibilities. And I'll throw another thing out. As long as we're talking about the future, I talked to some folks who think space-based solar power is an option where we can actually launch rockets with panels that get mounted in space and beam the energy back to Earth where it can be used. And what the benefits of that is you get no cloud cover. You get 24-hour a day dispatchable energy from space. And we know that they're using solar panels in space right now to power satellites and things like that. They may utilize it to beam power to the moon, so that they can power equipment up there. So it's just a really interesting and innovative way. There are a lot of people out there that are a lot smarter than me that are doing these types of projects and really, I think, doing some exciting work.
Oh, you're speaking my language on space. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you believe it has not been designated a critical infrastructure? Our dependency, this isn't the next frontier. It is here and now, whether it's for positioning, navigation, timing, clock, signaling. The dependence on space has grown so exponential that any disruption to that would have the same impact that a significant disruption to the grid would have. And shockingly, it has not been by the United States designated a critical infrastructure yet. But that will change. I'm pretty optimistic that will change because, well, duh, if it doesn't, we're kind of doomed. But that is interesting that it's not only the here and now, it's where it can go in the future as well. And
one of the things that I found interesting about what's making this more feasible today is that we've got these relaunchable rockets and all of these private companies that are developing technology that can be reused, and it's bringing the costs way down. And that's really what's driving the ability to do it.
True that. We recently had the CEO of United Launch, ULA, on to talk about some of the space launch, and they really have dropped in terms of price dramatically, and will continue to drop, I think. What about electric vehicles? To me, I think the demand so we touched on AI. There's much more there, but at the end of the day, the energy demand and need for artificial intelligence is going to exponentially grow. We know that it's at about 16% data centers account for right now. I think Goldman Sachs is figuring that's going to double within a couple of years, not many years out. And then the numbers get much bigger and bigger. It's sort of one of these pathways that go forward. But EVs are also a huge suck on energy, aren't they?
Yeah, you bring up a great point because, the data centers get a lot of the publicity, and everyone is worried about what they could potentially require for energy demand. But electric vehicles and the electrification of everything, we talk about manufacturing and, industry. Instead of using fossil fuels, they're starting to turn to electric boilers and electrifying other services that they utilize that used to be powered by gas or coal or, some other fossil fuel. So I think there's just going to be a continual upswing in the demand that's needed in the grid. We have been stagnant for decades, honestly. And that doesn't mean there hasn't been growth, but that growth has been basically absorbed by behind the meter solar or by energy efficiency improvements. I don't believe anybody still has incandescent light bulbs in their lights anymore. Everybody's switched to LEDs, which use 13 watts instead of
except my wife, believe it or not, but that's okay.
Well, there's still some out there, but boy, the ability to become more efficient through lighting and other.
And no, you're preaching to the choir. I've had this discussion. You're right. It's the energy
in already.
Big deal. Yeah.
So from this point forward, there's really not a lot that we can save. You can only get so efficient with a refrigerator or with, your air conditioning unit. And as the temperatures seem to keep getting higher, they're going to be turning their air conditioners on more and more. and places that maybe didn't used to have air conditioning may be getting it. So we're going to see more demand from that as well.
Absolutely.
Heat pumps are another avenue. You can almost go on and talk about all the things that are going to be electrified or continue to grow in usage. And it's amazing to think that, yeah, we've got to power this stuff. And
Yogi Berra once said, "The future ain't what it used to be." May he rest in peace. And the only way to predict the future, I guess, is to shape it. But when we look at what this demand, the one thing I think we can agree on, the demand is going to get greater and greater and greater. I mean, could you envision the highways of tomorrow paved in silicon, which is also going to have an energy demand? I kind of feel like you're going to have cars powered along the way if they don't have the battery life that they need. I mean, your head starts hurting thinking about all this, but that's not necessarily so far away, is it?
you know, these are innovations. It's hard to imagine where we're going, because if you'd have taken me back 10 years and said that we'd have AI, basically running our lives practically, and you could ask your phone anything and have an answer immediately, I'd have been like, wow, what a world. But what's the next 10 years going to look like when AI is helping us get there,
Exactly.
developing the tools and developing the technology that we need to become even better?
And not to bring it back to China, but I will. China is a primary focus of a lot of our podcast discussion, but it's a race we cannot afford to lose, whether it's around AI, quantum, and I think you're spot on. To get there, they recognize the need to really quadruple down on energy. So I still think that we want to be at the vanguard driving all of this. Is that a view you share?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very important for our national security. We've got the smartest people in the world working on projects. In our labs, we've got just incredible knowledge and skill. And I just think, if we put our minds to anything, we can do it. So I'm excited about what can happen. And I think we've got to put the money, put the focus, have the private investment, public-private partnerships. All of these things are important to make sure that we get where we need to go with technology and the future.
And you touched on something near and dear to me, the money. Policy without resources is rhetoric. So at the end of the day, it's sometimes hard to make the research argument when budgets are constrained and tight and what have you. But if we're not out R&Ding everyone else, we're going to be looking through rear view mirrors wishing we did. So, but I think it's not all federal funding, right? It's also industry, and you're starting to see that. And I just want to underscore, research budgets cannot drop exponentially, or we will be paying a price sooner rather than later too, since these technology spikes seem to be going really fast.
Yep, I agree with you.
And on the threat side, I spend most of my time worrying about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Obviously, Iran is in the news right now. And you talked about geothermal. I'm thinking about bunker buster bombs that might be able to get to some of that in the future. But all things said and done, I don't think the security implications are paramount, right? And we've had many utility leaders come in, and they'll say that's literally one of their top 5 priorities that they are struggling with every day. But from a magazine's perspective, where you get to hear from all these cool people designing new things, how often is security brought up? Is it a footnote, or is it a first chapter set of issues? Or somewhere in between,
Yeah,
chapter 5.
I'll be completely honest with you. I don't get enough people worried about cybersecurity reading our publication. I put out the information.
Well, your viewers here will be coming to you, making that a priority, I hope.
So, because, I believe it's super important. And cybersecurity should be top of mind for everyone throughout the power industry, because I worry about, some of these potential, hacks could be already embedded in our system, and we've got to maintain our security practices, best practices, and really, beat that system. We can't let them take control of our components. It's just vital. And what I tend to sense is that people realize it's important. They understand that we have rules and we need to maintain security. They think it belongs to somebody else.
Yep. Someone else's problem. The IT guy. Yeah.
People.
Or gal.
We've got
Yep.
people that worry about that stuff. I don't need to. But in reality, it's all of us. Anybody that's working in a plant, anybody that's, working with technology, we all have to be cognizant of how do we maintain safety? How do we secure our passwords? How do we not put a USB into something that might already be infected, or vice versa? So I think the more we can spread the word and keep people cognizant of how important it is. And like I said, I think they know it's important. They just don't always think it's their responsibility. And that's where I think we need to be more proactive in making sure people realize that.
Aaron, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's not just the cybersecurity. It's everyone needs to be cyber aware, cyber informed when they're in the labs. It's almost too late by the time it's fielded anyway. So you always want to try to bake it into the design. And part of that is it's not only technical, it's thinking through what the potential implications could be. And not to put too fine a point on it, but when you were talking about owning some of our infrastructure, Volt Typhoon, which was a Chinese cyber actor, this is all public now. They literally did the cyber equivalent of preparation of the battlefield, where they own that infrastructure and can turn it on or off to meet their needs when they want to meet those particular needs. So that's a lot different than hacking in. They're in the system. So these are issues that, not to foot stomp it too strongly, but we have to invest in. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be something that everyone thinks through. And the reality is don't think it's someone else's problem. A, it's all of our problems. And B, don't think that it can be looked at after the balloon goes up. You need to be thinking all of this well in advance. And whatever we can do to help on that side, I want to make sure our listeners, viewers sort of meet your listeners, viewers, and make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Hey, Aaron, I feel like I dominated too much of the discussion. I've never had an unspoken thought. So if you've got any questions, please let me know. If not, I really enjoyed this discussion. I'm learning a whole lot, and this was a whole lot of fun. But let me turn it to you.
I actually felt the same way. I felt like I dominated it. So I think if we both felt that way, we must have done all right.
Boom, boom. Any questions I should have asked that I didn't?
Not from me. I feel we covered a lot of stuff, and we could probably get back on for another half hour or more and go over even more. But I'm happy with what we covered. So thanks, Frank.
Well, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the partnership, and hope this is the first of many in the future. So thank you, Aaron. And
one last thing I want to say is thank you, too, for contributing. I actually published an article that you wrote along with your counterpart, Kyle. I think it's Kyle.
Kyle Klein. Yep. Our head of policy.
We had that in a commentary piece in our May issue, I want to say. So thank you for contributing that. And I hope people will come and read it on our Power Mag website.
Likewise. Thank you, Aaron, and Godspeed.
All right. Thanks. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to the Power Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe to our podcast. We're always looking for more listeners, and your review will help us reach more people in the platform. Also, stay in the loop by checking out Power Magazine's website. That's powermag.com, POWERMAG.com. And we're also on social media on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So please follow us there and stay in the loop on what we're covering at any given time. So again, thanks for following us, and thanks for listening to the Power Podcast.